This daily drawing exercise is a small tree canopy. I took this photo actually quite some years ago, and I did do a small oil painting of it at first. So this isn't the first time I've seen it, though I must admit I haven't looked at it for a long time. Now with this is all about creating enough leaf effect to convey the texture and the surface and the form of the canopy, but not so much that it becomes a total covering of lines that then becomes hard to read anything into. So let's see how we go. I'm using a 0.3 millimeter pen because I didn't want to end up with lines that were too fine. I think if I were doing this again, I'd probably use the 0.2 though, because it turned out I wasn't as pushed for time as I normally am with these 10-minute drawings. I actually finished this one in the 10 minutes. So I could have therefore used the finer pen to do some finer, more nuanced creation of the surface, the effect of the light on the surface, perhaps allowing for a little more light by using lighter lines, and still have had time to create the darker values with that pen. Although, of course, I could have also switched to a 0.3 for the darker area. So that's something to bear in mind for me for next time. This is part of the thinking I do after each drawing that I do. It's not just did the drawing turn out the way I wanted it to, but did I use the best materials for it? So I'm trying to, as you can see, I've done my normal technique of dashes and dots and creating a very vague outline that will either be hidden by my final drawing, and that's the preference, that's what I'm aiming to do, or even if they end up still being there, they're not going to be particularly noticeable at the end. They're certainly going to be less noticeable than an object that's out of proportion. And so these leaves fall in a very, very clear direction, off to one side or the other, or straight down, or more straight out. And I'm wanting to capture that direction with what I'm drawing, with the marks I'm making. Every mark we make is contributing to some sort of visual effect in our drawing. So what we want to do is to capture the visual effect in the reference and echo that. With this sort of thing, it's really easy to, particularly once we get into a rhythm, to start to just keep drawing the marks along to our rhythm and actually to forget to go back and connect with the reference. I'm not filling in the outline with these marks to form a pattern, and that's the danger, that's the unhelpful way of thinking that it's easy to get into, particularly with this sort of subject where we have a lot of effect to draw. It's easy just to see the area within which we have to put it and to just keep going and to end up going too much, doing too much over too wide an area and losing some of the form, some of the three-dimensional movement that we have on the surface of our object, in this case of the tree foliage. I suspect I probably went over this a little bit too much. I'm actually preferring how it looks now with my memory of how it looks at the end. It's not necessarily such an unhelpful thing to video at least part of the drawing process and then compare it at the end and see whether there was a point where certain elements of the drawing perhaps were more successfully related to conveying the sense of the reference than they were at the end. However, I'm trying to particularly see the dark value areas and to put enough lines in those to make them as significantly darker in my reference to the surrounding foliage as they are in the reference. One of the advantages in looking through the camera is that it's all a lot smaller, and that lets us see the whole scene all at once in a way that's tighter and more pronounced than maybe happening in our drawing. And also it just makes it look a bit different to what we've got used to as we're drawing. It's the same effect as holding a drawing up to a mirror, that just flipping it from left to right or right to left often gives us just enough difference in terms of how it looks without actually changing how it looks, to let us see it almost as if we're someone else seeing it for the first time. And that can be very helpful in spotting weak areas, and particularly when it's not too late to correct the weak areas to strengthen them in some way. Now, there are some branches that we see shadowed that connect some of the tree canopy parts, some of the clumps of foliage, but we don't really see them very clearly. Most of them, even where we do see them, have got leaves in front of them, and so I'm still trying to create the effect of the massive leaves, either tightly clumped or less tightly clumped, but there really aren't large open spaces on this tree canopy. I should take a photo of it. Now it's at least 10 years larger. Now, the leaves are very small. This is where it does get a bit tricky with our mark making, because we don't want to draw marks that will look like they're leaves unless that's the right size. Now, these leaves are very small. I'm trying to do marks at the very edge of the canopy, on the silhouette edges, that do represent leaves. So very small dashes or dots, really, and hoping then that that will be what the eye picks up and the brain will use to try and establish the sense of scale, so that these lines I'm doing now on the tree canopy itself really are hatching lines for value. And while they indicate the flow of the form of the leaves and the way they hang, I'm really not wanting them to be seen as leaves. It really can be difficult drawing with pen particularly, and particularly in a quick sketch where we can't start to perhaps do these marks with as much finesse as we might like. I don't know whether this feels that it would be boring to draw, to look at. I found it really relaxing, really quite peaceful after some of the 10 minutes drawings that we've done. Every time I looked at the clock, at the timer, for once, it was always less time than I was expecting, rather than 1 or 2 minutes faster than I'd hoped for. Now, this right-hand side, because I'm right-handed, it's harder to draw the lines the direction I want them to. It's a more awkward movement for me, because in some ways I'm having to pull the line away rather than draw it with an easy movement. I have to be moving my whole arm for every line rather than being able to do it with the wrist. So obviously looking at the clock in that gap, and then at the reference, and working out where do I need to go a bit darker. So this is where I'm just now trying to establish my final dark patch areas, because I realise the time is just about up. So looking at my reference, where are the darkest darks? A lot of little lines close together to try and create that, so that we have more variation, so that there's less of the midtones, or less of the darker midtones, because some of them become clearly much darker than the rest. And we're pretty well done. Just a few little feature twigs that we actually can see on the reference, just to give it a bit more of a tree look. How do you think it's gone? great little foliage exercise to do. Trees are everywhere, really, almost regardless of what we want to draw. So it really is worth working out a way that we can capture them effectively so that they don't become a weak spot in our drawing. If you find trees difficult to draw, then that's all the more reason to practice just trees over and over again. Not necessarily so that they're the main subject. You could practice drawing them for how they would look halfway back in your scene next to a building. But there's no need to have to put up with weak elements in our drawings. We can just work on those in these exercises, and that will fast track our improvement. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, please hit the like button if you found this interesting, if you find this series helpful. I think it's a great way to really fast track our drawing improvement over the long term. So why not give it a go? You'll find this reference photo, of course, on my channel community page. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, 10 minutes or not, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.